This is part 2 of building the bread shelf.
Hi, welcome to our Lazy R Homestead. I'm Heather.
And I'm Tom.
We have already built it out of wood.
It's all assembled, right? That's the whole thing.
That's it, yep.
Except for it's upside down.
Now it's time to finish it.
The 2 inches are the feet. And so one daughter can have their bread on this side, the other can have her bread on this side, and we'll have the top for our bread and baked goods. Maybe a cookie jar.
We need to cover up the indentations where the screw heads are with wood putty and fill in some cracks and other flaws in the wood. Then we need to sand it and paint it.
So we got some of this Durham's water putty, and you just mix it with some water to make a wood putty. Fill in the screw holes where they're inset and some little chips in the wood and stuff.
It sets very quickly, so you want to mix a little bit, use it up, and then mix some more and use it up, and not try and mix everything that you need for your whole project all at once.
Yeah, if I need more, I can make more. So it's just a powder, you mix it with water. They say on the directions to use by weight, approximately, depending on how thick you want it. I think it was 1/4.
3 to 1, yeah.
3 to 1.
So,
Weight of the powder to 3 grams, for example, or whatever your measurement of powder to 1 gram water, etc. by weight. But I'm not weighing it. I'm just putting it in until it's the consistency that I want. I'm just using an old chopstick. I don't know if you can see in there. Is it in the camera frame? It's a pretty good consistency on the first try. It's a little, maybe a little tiny bit soft. But I need to get it in some tiny crevices, so I think I'll be happy with that. Take a putty knife. The only problem is I can't get the putty knife down in my little cup, so. Slop it on with the chopstick. Scrape it with the putty knife. Kind of try to poke it down into the little holes. Problem is they can't see what I'm doing. Let me do one over here.
same basic technique as mudding a wall, drywall. The drywall is all about layers, and this you kind of want to get all of it in one shot if you can.
Unless it's really deep or something, maybe.
Then you can sit there and look at it and see it dry before your eyes.
And what makes you know that it's drying? Is it the color?
The color is getting lighter.
One thing that can be frustrating is you go to scrape it and it bubbles up out of the hole, like peels out of the hole instead of scraping off. Like there's an air bubble underneath it or something.
Yeah, I think it doesn't like to stick to metal as much as it does wood either, so.
Wow, this end is in really bad shape. You can see there's a lot of putty on there. It's got all sorts of crevices, creases, and chips and stuff.
This stuff you can sand down just like, it's wood or drywall mud, so
I'm using more than I expected. I think that I'm going to have to make some more.
once you get it all in there and it dries, just sand it nice and smooth, and hopefully you won't know there's any screws there at all.
Or any wood filler. I'm going to have to come back and put some more putty on that. But I don't think you can really put putty on it when it's partially dry, because it kind of partially sticks and pulls the partially dry putty out. So I think I'm going to have to come back to that side later. So I need to mix up some more putty, but I can finish that off camera. The wood putty is pretty dry. I have a sanding block. That part's a little damp there in some of the little holes. You can see it. There's a dark circle. This one's easy to see. So where it's dark, it's still damp. Where it's light, it's already dry. And on that one side that had a lot of problems, you can see there are some darker streaks in it, which is when I came back and put more on after the first layer dried, because I had run out of wood putty and needed to make more, so I waited until it was dry or dryish before I put the next coat on. So I'm just going to pick dry areas to start kind of lightly sand, and I'll try to sand the sharp edges off of these too. Probably should start with that. This is a coarse sandpaper. I don't know what grit this is, but it's coarse. So I'm kind of slightly beveling the edge by putting it at an angle and going over the edge just a little. It gets a little splintery on the ends, so I'm just kind of smoothing out any splinters on when I'm doing it flat this way. And this edge is really rough, so it needs to be sanded. Still plugged in. Did I trip a circuit? Do you want to do the insides? I was just about to do the insides. I'm just kind of lightly going over to make sure that there are no splinters, and there's some patching in here that needs to be kind of done. It's getting a little worn though, so I probably need to start cutting a new one. Let me see how wide that is so I can cut a strip. I'm just putting the sandpaper across and folding it so I can know what size. Feel like it needs a new piece, or are you okay? You put the one end of the sandpaper on the spikes with it lined up straight on the pad that you're going to be sanding with, and then make sure you pull it tight around, and you got to get it on top of the nails or spikes, and that can be a little bit difficult to get it far enough in that it's not too loose when you get done. See, it has a little bit of give, but that's probably as tight as I can get it. There you go. I'll cut a medium one too. I finished sanding this bread shelf last night. I used the coarse grit, then I used a medium grit sandpaper, and then I went over the whole thing last with a fine grit sandpaper. It's not perfectly smooth. It's got some texture to it, but I'm not worried about that. It might help the paint to stick a little bit even. We'll see. When I was done sanding this last night, I wiped it with a rag to get the sawdust off, and then brought it in the house so it wouldn't get dewed on overnight. I didn't show any of the wiping it because it was dark by the time I did that. And I had to go back out to the Lowe's because I had requested this nice sort of a hunter's green furniture paint, and they colored it, and I went and I picked it up and paid for it, and I didn't, it was on a low counter, and I saw the top, and I just took it to the checkout. And when I went to read the directions this morning, I was like, this isn't furniture paint. It was just interior latex paint. So I had to go back and exchange it. I got the furniture paint this morning, so it's freshly stirred at least. And it says to recoat it after 12 hours. So I'm going to try to, I have it flipped upside down. I'm going to try to paint the bottom and then turn it on its side and paint the inside and sides and let that dry a little bit so that I can then put the foot part down on the workbench and paint the top later today. And then I'll have to wait till tomorrow to put the second coat on. So I'm only going to be able to get 1 or 2 coats on per day, and hopefully the weather will hold out so I can keep doing it outside so I don't have to do it in the house. I'm going to start with the feet. Now, I have not primed this. The reason I chose not to prime it, it's going to be too much. I'm not going to need all of it for this. So I'm basically using this paint as its own primer. So I just need to put extra coats on it is all. Hopefully that will work. The reason I'm putting the feet on, painting the feet first, is so that they have more time to dry before I turn it over. This paint color is, I got it from the Lowe's. It's Valspar furniture paint, and it's a quart size of number 5011-6 Southern Garden, in case you want to get paint this color. I've never used furniture paint before, so I'll be very interested to see how this goes. This is not the chalk paint that you might be familiar with. Some people paint furniture with a paint that has sort of a chalky finish to it, and then they like wax it with like an acrylic coating at the end, and it can be used to make distressed looking furniture and stuff. That is not what this is. The temperature's in the 60s. Between the breeze and the sunlight, I expect the paint is going to dry very quickly. I can see it drying. You can literally see it drying. The drier parts look a little darker in color. At a different angle, I can see the spots that I missed that I couldn't see from the other side. Kind of spots in the texture of the wood. Flip this over. I don't want to let any of the paint form drips. Otherwise I'll have to sand them off or something. I'm tapping some of this in with the tip of the brush to try to get in some of the kind of dense and kind of pock mark little holes in there. So paint on just this side of the brush and not this side, with the point in the corner. Brush from the bottom up. And across the bottom, I'm just brushing back and forth across the bottom. Make sure I get all of that. Pressing the bristles into any spots that I missed that look like there's a little divot that needs to be filled. I want enough paint that I don't have, that it's not like sort of being scrubbed in. I want it to like smoothly get laid across the surface or along the surface. But I don't want so much paint that it's drippy. Get up on here. Just getting up on the step so I can reach down in there without bumping this side that's already painted. This has a lot of wood putty on it. Definitely has some texture. Still needs to have the paint pressed into it. So you can kind of see these little spots where there's texture there, where it's dented in. And so I have to like press the paint into those divots. It does not want to stick to the wood filler. Did you see how the paintbrush lifted it back up off the wood filler? Wish me luck that it doesn't just peel off. Whoop, see? Look. See how I do this? And it lifts the paint back up off of the wood filler. And I think some of the filler came back up too, where it's maybe really thin. Now that's going to be a problem. Hopefully the paint will hold the wood filler in place. The package on the wood filler did not say how long to cure it before painting. It suggested not painting it though. Suggested tinting the wood filler as opposed to painting over top of it. So this may end up looking really bad when I'm done, or it might not age well. The feet are still not dry, and this isn't dry enough. Oh, there's some definite spots I missed in there. I'm gonna need to let this dry before I flip it onto its feet to paint the top. It's still fairly wet. It's tacky. The paint doesn't come off when I barely touch it, but it's tacky on the bottom, so I don't want to put the weight on the feet. It's been about 2¼ hours since I finished that first coat, and it's pretty dry. It's not cured yet, but it's dry. Well, that spot wasn't dry. It was a little wet spot right there. It got a little thick in the corner. When I finished painting the first time, before letting the paint dry, I cleaned off the rim of my can before putting the lid on. And of course I washed my hands and cleaned out my paintbrush with soap and water. It might need to be stirred this time. I should probably get my stir stick. Oh yeah, it looks good. Start in this little crevice. There's a lot of texture on these end pieces of the plywood, even though I sanded it a lot. So you kind of got to poke the paint down into all those little nooks and crannies. This is the side that it was sitting on before, so I'll be painting that also. I try not to get the paint too high up on my brush so that it's easier to clean the paint out of the brush. I don't want paint stuck up in here where I can't wash it out. A little thick there. Okay, so I'll get this side and then I'll get the front edge. So I dip, take it, paint off the back side, put the side with the paint on it up, and that way it can't drip as I'm moving it around, or isn't likely to. So when I did this edge, I got a little bit of a lip on this side, so I'm just smoothing that out. Just putting a tiny bit of paint on the tip of my brush. Make sure I don't have any drips along this edge. There's a drip got inside there. Smoothing out. Just trying to catch any drips. So far, I have found the furniture paint to stick a little more securely to my skin anyway, and to the paper towel and stuff. It's like very tacky, very sticky. It's like really on there. So definitely I want to make sure I clean up everything really well before I put it away and before I leave this until tomorrow. This is going to sit out here for a few minutes to dry, and when it's done drying, before it gets dark, I need to bring it in the house so that it doesn't get condensation on it. This is day 2 of painting. It's noon and it only just reached 50 degrees, which is the coldest that you can start painting at. So unless I want to paint this in the house, I can only paint it once a day because there's a 12-hour drying time between coats. So if this needs a third coat, it's going to have to wait until tomorrow. You can kind of hopefully see the texture with this close-up, how there's grooves that the paint needs to go in. Oh, there's a pet hair on there. This is the foot of the shelf, which is why I'm painting it first, so it has more time to dry before I have to flip it over to paint the rest of it that I can't reach when it's upside down. So you can kind of see I'm pushing the bristles into the grooves in the wood, and then I need to clean up the drips. Painting in the crevice first, or the little corner. I'm getting really good coverage from this paint. I think the only reason that I might need another coat after this is because of the texture of this shelf having such extreme little crevices and things, some of which didn't get filled or covered with paint the first time. I forgot to check for the texture and see if there was some parts that I still wanted to sand down, some thick paint that I wanted to sand down. So I might have to plan a third coat for sure, so I can sand down any really sticky up spots of paint. We'll see. Want to make sure not to let the drips collect, because that causes a thick paint. Oh, there's a spot that didn't get filled. I think it's helpful when there's so much texture to paint in multiple directions to try to make sure you get into all the little crevices and dings and indentations. This is painting day 3 and hopefully the last day I paint. I decided there are some areas that need to be sanded a little bit because of paint drips. There's a little lip of paint, like a little raised area that I want to smooth out. I think that's the only significant one. This is a little bit rough overall. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to sand that now though. So I have some 320 grit sandpaper. It's very fine sandpaper. Just kind of smooth this down a little bit. Try not to get the wood to be exposed. Try to just get on the raised portion. It's a little tacky. It's kind of sticking. Oh, that's good. Let's see. Oh yeah, that does help a little bit. Just get a very light sanding across here. Oh, that feels much better. Pressing a little harder on these end pieces. They're a little more rough. Getting some drips here. It's a little tacky when you rip open these drippy, thick areas. You probably can't see it on the camera, but there's just these tiny, tiny little bumps in the paint that make it feel really rough and sharp, scratchy. I hope my last layer of paint after this is smoother. Otherwise I might have to get like a 400 grit sandpaper, really, really fine, and just gently swipe it. I still have a little bit of wood showing through in some places, and some of the sanding has exposed some wood. So I definitely need to put another coat on. This side's pretty smooth. This side had, I think, a lot of the wood putty filler on it. And it's a lot more smooth. And I'll just give it a light sanding. And the paint has stuck pretty well to the wood putty for the second coat. The first coat, not so much, but the second coat has stuck pretty well. Okay, that's pretty smooth there. Just check the bottom. This table is just big enough. So you can probably see there's some fur stuck to the feet. I may want to put a couple of nails or some tacks or something in the bottom before I flip it over so that it rests on that when it finishes curing, while it's finishing curing, instead of sitting on these feet. Or at least set it on a couple of little blocks or a wire rack or something. Or maybe bring, ow, the sawhorse in the house. That was a sharp little piece somewhere there. Oh, that's pretty nice. You can see the paint all over this. It's like waxy, and it's like hardly has any roughness to it all where that paint is. Make sure I don't have any loose paint sandings, fur on here. I did not have any trouble, as far as I could tell, with shaking the can instead of stirring it. I've probably used about half the can, so this has been a pretty good amount for this little shelf since I'm putting so many coats on. I think that if I had to put a fourth coat on, I would have enough paint for it and probably still have a little left over. There are some air bubbles in here, but by the time I put it on my paintbrush and spread it around, I don't think it will have any air bubbles after all that. It's kind of a cool, cloudy day. It's only 54 degrees out. think it might rain tomorrow, so hopefully this will really be my last coat of paint. Then you're supposed to let it cure for at least a few days before you use it. You want the paint to not only be dry but hardened. It's not probably going to really be all that hard after only 3 days. It depends on the environment somewhat, like how warm it is, how dry it is, or humid. I want to make sure I don't have any clumps at all that might need to be sanded. I think I'm going to paint the bottom part of the shelf. It's currently the bottom here. And then get the other side when I flip it over. Check this side, make sure there's no drips. There. It's hard to fill in all these little grooves when you can't get the paintbrush poked down in there very well. You've got to have it kind of at a low angle. So this is my most fussy layer, basically. Be very particular about it. I'll let it dry, and then I'll flip it over to paint this side, this side, this side. So these verticals and these and the top. I carefully grabbed this from the inside where it wasn't painted and flipped it right side up. I did touch some of the stuff that's only a little tacky. I'm not sure. I think it's only been about an hour and a half tops since I painted the first side, but it's getting late and it's 50.9 degrees in our front yard right now, so I need to just hurry up and get this done. I did not put any nails on the bottom. I am probably going to have to take this in the house to finish drying. This top part of this inside area was painted last time, so I need to do the two sides and the bottom. This is the finished bread shelf after it's had time to cure, about a week. This was a pretty simple project, but it did take some patience because I had to wait a full day, partly because of the temperatures outside, so I could only paint in the middle of the day. So it took me 3 days to paint it, and it is going to cure for more than 3 days before we can really use it. I just have it set up right now for the shot, and then I'm taking the bread back off and letting it cure for at least the rest of the week. Also, the quart size paint, I used furniture paint. That was about $25 for the quart. Chalk paint might be a little bit cheaper, but I didn't price that. That could also be used. So it's good that we had plywood already, so we didn't have to spend money on that, but it wasn't super cheap. So it cost us a little, as much as $30 maybe total for all of our supplies.
But now we have a very useful shelf where everybody can keep their bread. We have 2 cubbies for each of our daughters to use, and bread is no longer going to be stacked on top of each other, smashing. And we can keep track of bread as it gets older and needs to be thrown away.
Create the life you want to live. Bye.
Bye.